The elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor, and every single person in the open-plan bullpen of Ardent Capital Management stopped what they were doing. Not because of a fire alarm, not because of a board announcement. Because Wren Calloway had walked in wearing a dress. It was a deep plum wrap dress in heavy crepe fabric, cut to follow every generous curve of her body, instead of apologizing for them. The hem hit just below her knee. The neckline was tasteful but confident. She had paired it with nude block heels that gave her another 3 inches and a single strand of gold at her throat. For the 4 years Wren had worked as senior forensic accountant at Ardent Capital, she had worn exactly 2 things: dark wash trousers and oversized blazers in colors that belonged in a hospital waiting room. Today was different. Tonight she had dinner reservations at Maria on Central Park South with a man named Elliot who had spent 3 weeks on a dating app, convincing her she was worth a good restaurant. She crossed the floor toward her office in the northeast corner, acutely aware of the soft friction of the fabric against her thighs, the way her hips moved differently in heels, the fact that Brendan at the reception desk had physically swiveled his chair to watch her pass. She was 29 years old, 5'4" and 193 pounds, and she had long since made her peace with all of it. Mostly. The dress had cost her $400 and 45 minutes of standing in a dressing room mirror talking herself out of putting it back on the rack. She did not put it back on the rack. She was 3 steps from her office door. When the voice stopped her, Calloway, the single word came from the far end of the floor, from the corner suite with the floor-to-ceiling glass walls that looked out over Midtown Manhattan. It came from Stellan Vance. Stellan Vance was 37 years old, the founder and managing partner of Ardent Capital, and the most unsettling human being Wren had ever worked for, which was saying something, because she had once spent 14 months auditing a pharmaceutical company whose CFO collected taxidermied predators. He was standing in his doorway. He had not been there a second ago. He had the preternatural ability to materialize in spaces, as if he had always been there waiting. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that he kept slightly too long and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved by someone with an agenda. He was wearing a charcoal suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone, and his grey eyes were doing something Wren had never seen them do in 4 years. They were moving slowly, deliberately, down the length of her. "My office," he said, not a question. Wren's chin came up a half-inch. "I have the Hargrove reconciliation on your desk by noon, Vance. The Meridian irregularities are flagged in your secured folder, and the offshore transfer you asked me to trace from the Luxembourg account clears tomorrow." I didn't ask about Luxembourg. He hadn't moved from his doorway. "My office, Calloway. Now." The bullpen had gone so quiet she could hear the ventilation system. She walked past him into his office. He followed and pulled the heavy glass door shut behind him, muting the rest of the world. Ardent Capital's managing partner suite was enormous and aggressively minimal. Black marble desk, 2 low leather chairs, a wall of windows overlooking the skyline. No personal photographs, no decorative objects. Just the clean, brutal geometry of a man who did not believe in softness anywhere in his professional life. Stellan didn't go to his desk. He leaned against the edge of it and crossed his arms and looked at her, and something in his expression was doing something she didn't have a name for. "Is there a problem with the Meridian filing?" Wren asked, keeping her voice even. "No. The Hargrove numbers?" "No. Then—" "You have dinner plans," Stellan said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation either, technically, though something in his voice made it feel like one, like he had bitten down on a piece of information and found it unpleasant. "I do," Wren said carefully. "With who?" "That is my personal business, Vance." His jaw tightened. The muscle along the side of it flexed once, slowly, like something being very deliberately controlled. He pushed off the desk and closed the distance between them by half, and Wren was abruptly aware that Stellan Vance, who had spent 4 years treating her with the same distant transactional efficiency he extended to his Bloomberg terminal, was looking at her like she had just done something alarming. "You've worked for me for 4 years," he said, his voice dropping to something quieter and more dangerous than his usual boardroom tone. "In 4 years, you have never once dressed like this for this building. I'm not dressing for this building." "No." His eyes dropped briefly, deliberately, to the neckline of the plum dress and back up. "You're not." The air in the room felt suddenly pressurized. "Who is he?" Stellan said, and it came out like gravel. Wren looked at him steadily. In 4 years she had watched this man dismantle companies, ruin careers, and sit absolutely unmoved through negotiations that had made seasoned bankers physically sweat. She had filed forensic reports that quietly destroyed partnerships worth 9 figures and handed them to him like morning coffee. She was not going to be rattled in a plum dress. "A man I met," she said simply. "Is there anything work-related you need from me today, or don't go?" The words landed like something physical. Wren stared at him. "Excuse me?" Stellan's expression shifted, just barely, into something that looked involuntary, like a man who had said something before his better judgment could intervene and was now living with it. He didn't take it back. "Don't go to dinner with whoever he is," he said. "Vance, I know how that sounds." He reached out, and his knuckles brushed the fabric at her shoulder, the lightest imaginable contact, and every nerve ending in her body responded to it like a lit fuse. "I know exactly how it sounds. Go file it wherever you file irrational things from me. But don't go." Wren took a breath. She had spent 4 years not thinking about Stellan Vance as a man, the way you learn not to look directly at something that could damage you. She stepped back, smoothed the front of her dress, and picked up the tablet she had set on the edge of his desk. "I'll have the Luxembourg confirmation on your desk by 8 a.m., she said, and left. Elliot Horn was already at the restaurant when Wren arrived. He was attractive in a mild, catalogue-friendly way, sandy blonde, open smile, firm handshake, the kind of man who looked like he coached youth soccer on weekends. He stood up when she approached, and his eyes widened in a way that was genuinely gratifying. "Wren," he said, "you look incredible." She smiled, settled into the banquette, and ordered a glass of Barolo, and for 20 minutes the evening was perfectly pleasant. Elliot asked about her work with the practiced curiosity of a man on a first date. She gave him the sanitized version: forensic accounting, compliance analysis, financial irregularities. He nodded. He asked follow-up questions. Then the follow-up questions got specific. "Ardent Capital," Elliot said, swirling his water glass. "That's Stellan Vance's fund, right?" "He manages some significant private equity positions." "Zuns, he does," Wren said. "I've heard the portfolio includes some interesting offshore structures." Elliot set his glass down, particularly the Meridian Holdings subsidiary, the one routed through the Cayman accounts. The Barolo tasted like ash. Wren did not move. She was very, very good at not moving when something was wrong, because in her line of work, the moment you visibly reacted was the moment you lost. Meridian Holdings was not public information. The Cayman routing structure was not public information. She had documented it herself from inside Ardent's secured server, and the only people with access to those files were her, Stellan, and Ardent's 2 senior compliance partners. She reached slowly for her wine glass. "How do you know about Meridian?" she said. "A friend mentioned it," Elliot said, and the easy smile didn't waver, but his eyes had changed. They had gone flat and sharp in the ways of something that had been performing warmth and stopped. "My firm does a lot of cross-referencing on alternative investment structures. It would be incredibly useful to understand how Ardent's moving money through the northern accounts. Just a general overview. You must see the routing documentation in your daily workflow." Wren looked at him. The restaurant hummed around them. White tablecloths, candlelight, the low din of money and conversation. She had not been asked out because of the plum dress or the dating profile or 3 weeks of messages that had felt, in retrospect, exactly as deliberate as they now obviously were. She was a forensic accountant with top-level clearance at one of the most opaque private equity funds in New York City. She was a target dressed in good lighting. The humiliation was a hot, silent wave. She let it crest. She did not let it show. "I think," Wren said, setting her wineglass down with perfect precision, "that we're done with dinner." She reached for her handbag under the table. Elliot's hand came across the white cloth and closed around her wrist, not gently. "Sit down," he said quietly. The charm entirely gone. "We haven't finished the conversation. Let go of me," Wren said, her voice flat. "You're going to pull up the Ardent compliance portal on your phone," Elliot said, leaning in, his grip tightening, "and you're going to walk me through the Meridian documentation. All of it. Or this gets significantly more complicated for you and for Vance." He said it calmly, the way someone says it when they've said it before. Wren went very still. At the bar behind Elliot, a man in a dark suit had been nursing a single glass of scotch for the past 40 minutes. He had not looked at his phone. He had not looked at the television above the bar. He had been watching the table in the corner with the quiet, unblinking focus of a person whose entire professional life had been built on reading rooms. Stellan Vance set his glass down. He was across the restaurant in 14 steps. He didn't announce himself. He didn't raise his voice. He simply arrived at the table, reached down, and removed Elliot's hand from Wren's wrist with the controlled, deliberate force of a man who had made a decision and was executing it without commentary. Elliot's chair scraped back as he lurched to his feet. "Vance." Elliot started. "You have 5 seconds to identify yourself and your firm," Stellan said, his voice very quiet and very clear. "Before I make a phone call that will result in every financial license you currently hold being reviewed by the SEC by morning." Elliot's jaw worked. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Elliot said. "You approached my forensic compliance officer under false pretenses to extract privileged documentation." Stellan said the same quiet. "You touched her. Those are the only 2 facts I need." He looked at the man with the utter calm of someone who had already decided how this ended. The last person who attempted to compromise Ardent's compliance structure from the inside is currently explaining his choices to a federal grand jury in the Southern District. I suggest you consider that before you finish whatever sentence you're trying to start. Elliot looked between them. Something in the calculation behind his eyes shifted, recalibrated. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and walked out of the restaurant without another word. Stellan watched him go. Then he turned to Wren. She was sitting very straight in the banquette, her hands flat on the tablecloth, her expression carefully composed. Her wrist, where Elliot had gripped it, showed the beginning of a red welt. Stellan's gaze went to it and stayed there for a long moment. He sat down across from her in Elliot's chair and said nothing for a moment. "You followed me," Wren said. "Yes, you had no right." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." Something about the agreement stopped her. She had prepared for a defense. He didn't offer one. "How long were you there?" she asked. "Long enough to know his name is Elliot Horn, that he works for a competing fund with a pattern of using social engineering to extract compliance documentation, and that he has done this to 3 other women in the past 2 years. Stellan's voice was even and factual until it wasn't, and long enough to watch him put his hand on your wrist. He reached across the table without asking and turned her arm slightly, examining the mark on her skin. His touch was careful, completely at odds with the man she watched run a $40 billion fund. "I'm fine," Wren said. "I know you are." He released her wrist but didn't move his hand far. "You were already calculating your exit before I got there. I watched you do it." She looked at him. 4 years of distance between them. 4 years of being exceptional at invisible in the ways that didn't matter to spreadsheets. And now he was sitting in a restaurant booth with his cufflinks off and his voice doing something it had never done in any conference room she had ever been in with him. "Why are you here, Stellan?" she said. First name. It slipped out. He didn't react to it the way she expected. He looked at her in a way that was very direct and a little terrible. "Because you left in that dress," he said, "and I sat in my office for 11 minutes before I understood that I wasn't going to be able to think about anything else." Wren did not respond to that. She could not quite locate a response that was both honest and safe. "He was going to use you," Stellan said. "Elliot Horn. The entire relationship was constructed to access Ardent's compliance documentation through you, specifically because someone told him you were the one person in that building with full routing access who might be lonely enough to be vulnerable to it." His voice stayed even. "That is what I will not forgive. About Elliot," Wren said. "About whoever assessed you as lonely and vulnerable and decided that was an opening." He paused. "You are not lonely. You are private. Those are not the same thing, and anyone who can't distinguish between them does not deserve the access." Something tightened in Wren's throat. "You can't say things like that," she said quietly. "No," Stellan said. "I've been aware of that for considerably longer than tonight." The car back to Midtown was quiet. Stellan's town car, the privacy panel up, the city sliding past the windows in rivers of light. Wren stared out in, she said. Stellan had been looking at the back of the seat in front of him. He turned. "I know he knew the Cayman routing. That's internal documentation. That's 6 people in the building, maximum 4, Stellan said. You, me, Brennan, and Park. Then you have a leak," Wren said. "I know that too." "It's not Brennan," Wren said immediately. "His transaction patterns are consistent going back to 2019. Park had an anomalous network consolidation period." She stopped. Stellan was looking at her. "I flagged it at the time, in an internal memo. I don't know if anyone read it." "I read it," Stellan said. "I pulled Park's access logs yesterday, and I was waiting for confirmation." "I can confirm it tonight," Wren said, "if I can get into the compliance server remotely." Stellan was quiet for a moment. "You would need my authentication." "Yes." He looked at her in the low light of the town car. 4 years, and she had always been able to read his professional expressions, the particular set of his face that meant he was about to end a negotiation, the one that meant he was considering something he hadn't publicly committed to yet. She had never been able to read this one. "My apartment is on 74th, he said. "I have a secure terminal." The apartment was not what she expected, which surprised her, because she had expected to be surprised. She had anticipated the minimal aesthetic of his office translated into a home, all black marble and cold geometry. What she found was something more human. Books, actual physical books, stacked on shelves that ran floor to ceiling in the study, a kitchen with evidence of actual use, a worn leather chair by the window with a lamp angled over it that had clearly been positioned by someone who read there regularly. Stellan set up the secure terminal in the study, pulled a second chair to the desk, and sat beside her instead of behind her. For an hour and 40 minutes, they worked. Wren moved through the Ardent compliance network with the focused efficiency that had made her indispensable in 4 years and invisible in all the ways she had chosen to be. She pulled Park's access architecture, cross-referenced it against the Meridian consolidation timeline, traced 3 anomalous queries that had extracted routing summaries in non-standard formats and delivered them to an external server masquerading as an internal backup node. "There," she said, and pointed to the screen. Stellan leaned forward. His shoulder was close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. "He packaged it as routine backup traffic," he said, "standard obfuscation. But the time-stamped gaps are wrong. Legitimate backups run on 6-hour cycles. These are irregular. Someone was pulling manually, probably when they knew the network monitoring would be lowest." She pulled the extracted file list. "He's been doing it since March. 14 separate extraction events." Meridian was the most recent. Stellan studied the screen. Then he reached past her and opened a separate window, pulled up a contact in his encrypted communications, and drafted a message to Ardent's outside counsel in 4 lines. "That goes to the SEC Forensic Division by morning," he said. "You'll want to preserve the server logs before Park has any indication." Already flagged. He had done it while she was still talking, a parallel action, the quiet efficiency of a man who processed fast and moved faster. He leaned back. "You wrote the internal memo in March." "Yes. Why didn't you escalate it?" Wren was quiet for a moment. Because I wasn't certain, and because Park is senior to me in the organizational structure, and I had spent 4 years making myself not a problem. Stellan was looking at her. Not a problem, he repeated, quietly. It's a strategy, she said. It has worked professionally. It worked so well that a competing fund identified you as the most isolated person at Ardent with the highest access, Stellan said, and sent someone to exploit it. The words sat between them. I'm not isolated, Wren said. No, he said. You're private. I know the difference. She looked at him. He was watching her with the same focused attention he had been giving her since the moment she walked off the elevator in the plum dress, and she understood, sitting in the warm light of his study, with the compliance logs open between them, that it had not started tonight. How long? She said. Stellan did not pretend not to understand the question. Since the Kellerman audit, he said. 18 months ago, you found a discrepancy in a bond issuance that every other firm had signed off on for 6 years. You presented it to the board in 12 minutes. You were wearing a grey blazer and you had a coffee stain on your sleeve. And you dismantled 6 years of accepted accounting practice in front of 12 people who had built careers on not seeing it. He paused. And when it was done, you went back to your office and closed the door. Wren remembered the Kellerman audit. She remembered the grey blazer. She did not remember him watching. You said nothing, she said. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't make you leave, Stellan said. You had been deliberately making yourself small for 4 years, and I had been allowing it because you were extraordinary at your job, and I was a coward about the rest of it. The honesty of it was so direct it was almost physically uncomfortable. I'm not small, Wren said. I know. Something shifted in his expression. I know exactly what you are, Calloway. You are the sharpest person in any room you walk into. You have been doing me the favor of not demonstrating it at full volume, and I have been doing the company a disservice by not insisting otherwise. He reached over, carefully, and turned her wrist up in his palm, the way he had in the restaurant. The mark from Elliot's grip was fading to a pale bruise. He looked at it for a moment, and the expression on his face was very controlled and very cold, and had nothing to do with her and everything to do with what he was apparently deciding not to do about the man who had put it there. Stellan, Wren said. He looked up. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not tentative. She had been tentative for 4 years, and she was done with it. He went very still for one breath, and then his hand came up to the side of her face, and he kissed her back with the same focused, total intensity he gave to everything else, and 4 years of careful professional distance collapsed like a balance sheet that had been carrying a hidden debt the whole time. By the following Tuesday, the apartment they were sitting in when they found it had become the least interesting thing about the week. The SEC Forensic Division had contacted Ardent's outside counsel Monday morning. David Park had been placed on administrative leave by noon. By 3 p.m., the documentation Wren had compiled, clean, annotated, time-stamped, legally airtight, had been formally submitted as the evidentiary anchor of an insider trading investigation that would, the attorneys advised, likely result in federal charges within 90 days. Elliot Horne's firm had gone quiet. 3 compliance officers at competing funds had independently contacted Ardent's legal team with accounts of Horne's methodology, which turned out to be considerably more organized than one opportunistic dinner. He had been doing it for 4 years. He had a list. Wren's name had been on it for 8 months. She stood at the window of Stellan's office on a Tuesday afternoon, the midtown skyline filling the glass, and read the final summary from outside counsel on her tablet while he stood at his desk behind her. They want a desedition, she said. Me, specifically. Since I'm the one who built the extraction trail, I'll have Ardent's counsel accompany you, Stellan said. I don't need a chaperone. I know that, he said. It's not a chaperone. It's a signal to the SEC team about how seriously Ardent takes the integrity of this filing, which is considerable. She turned around. He was watching her from across the room with his arms loosely crossed, and his expression doing the thing it had been doing since Saturday that she was still learning the shape of. It was not cold. It was not transaction. It was something much more specific and directed, and she was getting better at not looking away from it. "I wrote a memo in March," she said. "I know. You should have read it more carefully in March. I should have," he said without defensiveness. "That's accurate. I was dealing with the Hartwell restructure, and I flagged it for follow-up and did not follow up. That was a failure on my part. It won't happen again." She believed him. That was perhaps the most disorienting thing about Stellan Vance, the absence of performance in his accountability. He did not apologize theatrically. He simply acknowledged the fact, accepted the consequence, and corrected the direction. It was the same quality that made him devastating in a negotiation, and apparently equally devastating in other contexts. "I want a different title," Wren said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Senior forensic accountant is accurate," she said, "but it undersells the scope of what I've actually been doing for 4 years. The compliance architecture for the Meridian structure, the Cayman routing protocols, the shadow ledger redundancy I built during the Hartwell restructure." "What title do you want?" Stellan said. "Chief Compliance and Risk Officer," she said, "with a seat at the partners' table for portfolio-level decisions. I've been operating at that scope for 2 years. I want the title to reflect it." He looked at her for a moment. "Done," he said. She had expected a negotiation. The absence of one was briefly disorienting. "That was fast," she said. "You're right," he said simply. "You have been operating at that scope, and I have been accepting the benefit, the acknowledgement. That ends today." He paused. "I would have offered it in March if I'd read the memo properly." "You would not have." "You're right," he said again, and something that was almost a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "I probably would have needed the crisis to see it clearly. I'm told that's a personal failing." "Told by who?" "By no one. I inferred it from the pattern of evidence." Wren looked at him across the quiet of his office, the skyline enormous and indifferent behind her. She had spent 4 years inside this building, making herself easy to overlook in the ways that felt safe. And somewhere in the process she had built something she hadn't entirely planned on. An infrastructure that the most unsettling man she had ever worked for had been quietly depending on, and finally, at significant personal cost to his composure, could not pretend not to need. She crossed the room and set her tablet on his desk. "I'm having lunch brought up," she said. "We need to talk through the SEC deposition timeline and the partner restructure before the Friday board call." "All right," Stellan said. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, opened her files, and got to work. After a moment, he sat down across from her and did the same. Outside, Midtown moved in its usual relentless geometry, and inside the glass-walled office on the 42nd floor, the woman the competing fund had catalogued as a quiet liability ran the room the way she had always run it, without announcement, without apology, and now, finally, without pretending she wasn't doing it.